Holding down the workpiece with hand tools. That's what the topic is today. You don't have to think about it too much if you're a power tool user, because that piece is typically moving into the machine. For example, a table saw, a bandsaw, a planer, that piece doesn't need to be held down. The machine is stationary and the piece is moving. Except for electric router, you're typically not worried about how to hold a piece down when you're using machines for woodworking. With hand tools, it's a different story. With the hand tools, typically you need a very sturdy way to hold that piece of wood in place while you're working on it. I'll show you some of the traditional ways that many people have used over the years. Maybe some of my ways are a little bit different, but in general, they're traditional methods. So let's show you some of those. One of the simplest ways to hold a piece of wood down is to just use a round bench stop or bench dog. This has a ball catch in it, or spring-loaded ball catch mechanism to hold the dog in place. You just drill a hole in there and it'll hold the dog. This is for a round hole. You can also make square holes. And this bench stop here, or bench dog, you can see how it's constructed. It is a little slanted right here, and there's another piece of wood attached to give it a spring-like mechanism, and that fits in here. I do angle the piece a little bit so it catches a little better, so it's angled towards away from the piece as you go down. So you can see that angle right there, angle down this way. So that's one way. You just put your piece there, or you use the round dowel. The problem with it is when you're working with a wide piece, the piece can swing around a little bit. So I'll show you some other options. I'm out at my workbench in the garage. This is a 5-foot long workbench, and I'm going to show you the tail vise that I have. It's just a vise. This happens to be one from Harbor Freight. It's quick release, and to use it, you just put a bench dog into the hole on the wooden block on the vise, and you put it on, of course, the other side. Everybody kind of knows this. You're a hand tool woodworker, and this is a very secure way of doing it. You'll read about or see other types of more sophisticated tail vises, which might work better than this. For my purposes, this works excellently. So that's another way. Another manufactured kind of bench dog is this planing stop here, and there are various types. This one you set in, it's a little tricky cutting it out into your workbench, but there's a spring in here, and these are available pretty readily. I don't know the exact name here, but when you're done with it, you just turn that, and it should stay flat and not interfere. So all these methods are to work the face of the board, right? You're not going to be able to do the edge of the board too readily with these bench dogs. And we'll get into methods for that in a moment. I showed you the tail vise on my other workbench. In this workshop, my workshop's so tight, I could have had a shorter workbench, I guess, and that ended here, and maybe had I could maybe have a mobile station over here and put a tail vise in on this side. So typically you want your tail vise on the right side if you're right-handed, because you're planing this way, and you don't want to be pushing a plane into the tail vise. You want to be pushing away and into the, all your force is going into the bench dog rather than the tail vise. But in this case, I really didn't have much of an option because I didn't have enough room. So I ended up eventually adding a tail vise, and I saw this, I think, in Popular Woodworking, if I'm not mistaken. It's basically kind of like a ladder that I created here. Hickory piece here, and glued and screwed blocks of wood that are spaced exactly the same width as this bench stop. So they fit. So this is a add-on tail vise. And the vise part of it normally should be on that side, but I didn't really, I couldn't put it here because I have my chair here. It was like everything, it would have to move. I just didn't have enough room. It would get in the way of a lot of stuff. So I ended up putting it on this side, and it works fine, actually. The only problem is my bench is a little wonky right now. It's not completely flat because I used just scrap MDF and pine here. So I like the bench in my garage better. But to use this, you just put your bench dog in to the appropriate spot, and there that goes. And you tighten this. This is just like a Jorgensen double screw vise. You can see it tightening down there. And cut these slots away so that the thing fits in. Right? Can you see that? So this one is fixed. This one moves freely. This one's not attached to anything. This is fixed in there. I can't remember how I screwed it in exactly, but it's screwed in. So that's not moving at all. And so that holds pretty well. Yeah, and this thing's right here, the top of that. But it holds pretty darn well. But the problem is it's very fine thread. You typically want like an Acme thread, something with wider thread. Otherwise, you're like what I'm doing here. You're here all day making this thing move just like an inch. So not ideal, but it works for me. There's another type of bench dog or tail vise type of thing. And this one's inset into the bench. This is available from Veritas, Lee Valley. I use it occasionally. It's actually very solid. It comes with this little magnetic type of thing that goes in here. You put your other bench dog here, and you can make custom made pieces. I have this little thinner wooden one that I put in, and you can make it even thinner if you wanted to. And I use this for smaller pieces. It has 2 sets of holes, and you put your other piece there. So I tend to use this for smaller pieces. Still on the subject of working the face of the board, there's this more versatile type of bench stop that has 2 sliding bench dogs in it, and you just there you go. And you just fit it in however you want. That's another way to work the piece of wood. Again, available from Lee Valley Tools Veritas. Finally made in Canada. I've tried all sorts of things. I do think the tail vise is probably the most versatile, but I fooled around with different other items. Sometimes you might be limited, or you don't want to put holes in your bench. You could use these T-tracks. In this case, I got this T-track that these are also, I believe, available at Lee Valley Tools. It's got a T-slot or a T-bolt that goes in, and you take an Allen wrench and tighten it, and you got your instantaneous bench stop. And it does swivel for whatever reason if you have a piece that's not even. There's that. There's this type of thing also. That typically goes into a bench hole. So let's pop that out. So this goes into a bench hole, and you can lock it in place, and that'll squeeze up tight against another bench dog as well as needed. So that again is available from Veritas. They have quite a bit. And sometimes you're working with finer pieces, and maybe you're doing some using some molding planes, things like that. This is called a sticking board. This is for smaller pieces. And this one, I just have a hole here that have a T-slot screw or bolt that comes through on both sides to hold this piece in place. And then I place this on top, and it has some oval holes in it, so I can adjust the width however I want. You could either put little nails on the end, or you could put a bench hole on there to hold the piece. And you would use it to work some complicated molding patterns. So those are various ways, and there are probably a dozen other methods to hold a workpiece down when you're working the face of the board. Now let's move on to the edge of the board. How do you do that? To work the edge of the board, I'm typically using just a vise that's flat with my bench top. So just stick it in and you can work away. The problem is it's a very long board that as you're working the ends, it tends to dip out of that vise. So you need some other support for that. And I'll show you some options for that. I'm back here on the other Moravian workbench. Let's say I have a longer board, and if I push down too hard, it's going to end up moving. So one option, and because I built this about 2 years ago, and I haven't built anything too big yet and haven't needed to do it, one option is to drill some holes or create, put some kind of piece of wood in here, maybe slotted and sliding, and that gives you more versatility. But you could drill a hole into the workbench leg, and you take a bench hook like this, and then you use it to secure the piece of wood. So I think the Nicholson bench uses that kind of method. They have a bunch of dog holes in there for the bench hook. Another option when working the edge of the board is to use one of these. I think it's called a bird's beak. You have a piece of wood, cross grain, so the grain's running this way. If you made it the other way, with all the impact, you probably crack it. So you cut out a notch straight on this side or perpendicular to the leading edge or the edge on this side. And then on this side, it's at 15-degree bevel off of 90-degree line here. And whatever, this is about 2 inches wide here. And you could put a dowel hole or a dowel on both sides, which I used to have, but it actually holds more secure for me by sticking it into my square dowel here. So the piece gets inserted on the left side, on that straight side over there, and you have a wedge. And this wedge goes in, and I think I have a piece of sandpaper here to hold it in place. So the wedge goes in, and just give it a little tap with the hammer. And this holds pretty well. I can make it tighter, and it holds very nicely if you want a plane. Sometimes you're not working the whole face, so you don't need access to the whole face. You just need access to the corner to work a molding perhaps or something like that. So in that case, you can use a bench hook. The bench hook will go into the hole, and sometimes you'll need 2 of these if the piece is long. And you still can use the planing stop. Probably helpful to use that. Sometimes you can use a block of wood in the corner like this, long piece of wood with a 90-degree cutout, and that also works. And you can then use your bench hook to clamp that, and it kind of holds it steady. Sometimes you'll find as you're working it, especially maybe on this end, it'll start pushing out. In that case, you can just grab a block of wood, longer block of wood, something like that. And maybe that'll hold it in place better. Things get a little bit more complicated. When I'm using this Stanley 55 plane, it has a fence on both the right and the left side. And if I'm working with a little piece, let's say all I have is a block of wood like this, and it's not coming off of a larger piece, this can be a little bit challenging to work. So what you can actually do is just either use a sticking board or stick your piece on top of another board and just nail it into a spot that it doesn't need to be playing down. And if that's on the end of the piece, you'll just cut that off if you don't need it, or it may not show for whatever reason. So you can nail that piece onto this other board. It works very well. It's a great solution when you're using the Stanley 55 and you're using both fences. Sometimes you'll be scratching your head on how you can end up using both fences with that. But this is a simple method to free up space so your guides here do not bottom out and hit your vise or your bench top. Another simple option is to just use these double screw clamps to hold your piece, and then use another clamp to hold that in place. So you'd have one on one side and put another on the other side. So if you're out in the field somewhere and you don't have a vise and you have these work very well. I hope this introduction of showing the various ways of holding a workpiece onto the workbench will help you out when you're doing your hand tool woodworking. I didn't cover every single way to hold the workpiece, but these are some of the more traditional methods. And maybe you have your own. If you have something that I might have missed that you think is important, please let me know in the comments.